Hey guys, Voltex here, coming at you with another Fantasy LCS vlog. I do apologize for missing last week. I was just swamped with summer class work and regular work, so sorry about that, but won't happen again. So yeah, there's some serious fantasy point production going on this split, guys, and it's pretty great. We got, people like Fnatic that are doing their jobs, producing a lot of points, and then we got the new teams like Origin coming in, producing a lot. We have some overachievers like H2K that are just putting out mad fantasy points despite their historical, even though they've only been around for a split, but their historical tendency of being more objective focused. CLG coming out with just week after week after week of massive fantasy point production. And then out of the woodwork, you have Dignitas, and it's just looking good. It is looking like a very healthy fantasy point split so far. Alright, so in review, we'll start out over in EU, Week 4, Day 1, Gambit over Giants. I think this is good for Gambit. Definitely a confidence booster, confidence builder to show that they aren't necessarily a low tier team, that they can beat these teams, and maybe after a couple weeks they can get themselves back to some relevance in the fantasy production category, except of course for Diamond, who somehow manages to go 0-1-0 in a 32-minute game or whatever it was. So outside of that, things are looking a little bit up for Gambit. Elements beating Roccat. Good for Elements. This is really bad for Roccat. A lot of people, including myself, thought Roccat was going to have a strong week coming off their win against Origin on Day 2 of Week 3. And then they come into this week against Elements and SK, both at the time combined only had one win between the two of them, and Roccat loses to both. So really upsetting and disappointing performance from Roccat. Fnatic over Origin. I think this was expected, but it was a little unfortunate for people who were playing Origin players because they really didn't put up too many points this game. SK over Unicorns of Love. This was interesting, definitely an upset here. Unicorns of Love were pretty much in control of this game. They had some really bad shot calling, like trying to trade the Baron for the inhib and didn't even end up getting the Baron. It was just a really sloppy game, but it does show that SK's not done. They're not super tilted like a lot of people thought they were. So maybe SK's another team that a couple weeks down the road, maybe they can get back to some relevancy again in fantasy point production. H2K over Copenhagen Wolves. Not too surprising there. H2K is looking really strong. On the other hand, you have Copenhagen Wolves who, really seem to be in a bad spot after this whole Deficio Dentist thing. The atmosphere seems to be bad. As you know, Airwalks stepped down from being their jungler, so things definitely not looking good in the Copenhagen Wolves clubhouse. SK over Roccat. This was part 2 of the Rockat's disaster in Week 4. Once again, it's actually, I think it's more positive for SK than it is negative for Roccat, because Roccat, there wasn't much expectations going in for Roccat, so it's not that big of a deal. It's better that SK was able to get 2 good wins under their belt, and it shows that they aren't totally out of it, that they could bring themselves back to being at least a mid-tier team. H2K, over Giants. Pretty standard here, as well as Fnatic over Copenhagen Wolves. And then Unicorns of Love over Gambit. This was good. Unicorns also had a pretty easy week on paper against SK and Gambit. Unicorns were able to finish the victory over Gambit, but also it's not like they did terribly from a fantasy point production against SK. They did put up a good amount of points, so they did their job there. And then Origin over Elements, once again, pretty standard result there. Switching over to NA, Dignitas over Team Impulse. So this was win 1 in their really massive week, Week 4 here for Dignitas, and it was pretty good. It was pretty convincing, and they put up a bunch of fantasy points while doing so. Gamsu with the 11-0-12 or something to that effect. The dude didn't die and got more than 10 kills and assists. Just had a massive day. Had a massive week for that matter at 72 total points. CLG over TDK, not too surprising. TSM over Team Liquid. I think this was good for TSM. Obviously, they seem pretty shaky recently, and being able to beat Liquid, who's definitely a top tier, top of the table NA team, was good. Should be a confidence builder for them. And then Gravity over Team 8, another team where Gravity I think is just better than Team 8, even with Nien. They're still adapting, adjusting to Nien's playstyle, I guess, because they don't seem that great. They did beat TDK in day 2, but once again TDK hasn't gotten a win either, so not particularly impressive there. An Enemy over Cloud9, and this is probably the backbreaker for Cloud9 fans, where Cloud9 fans really have to just like look at this split and say it's a rebuilding split. You just temper your expectations. Honestly, it's like being a Yankee fan right now. If you're a Yankee fan right now, you just had the Hall of Famers in Derek Jeter and Mariano retire in back-to-back years. The core of the team isn't there anymore. And not to say, obviously, the core of the team still is there. Only incarnation is a new player, right? But you just gotta understand that it's a rebuilding time. It's a time where you gotta figure things out, and you guys probably aren't going to Worlds this year. So it's unfortunate, but Cloud9 is a team that it's really unfortunate because you probably drafted them relatively high, and they're just not producing. So it just sucks. Day 2, Team 8 over TDK, like I said, not too surprising there. TSM over Gravity, once again, nothing surprising there. CLG over Cloud9. This was actually a pretty close game. Like Cloud9 was in this a lot of the ways, and it was a long game. You just had that pentakill at the end with double lift, which is awesome. But once again, Cloud9 total almost complete loss of fantasy value. They actually didn't do terribly this week. Even in an 0-2 week, I think 3 out of the 5 of their players put up more than 25 points. So it wasn't disastrous. But once again, Cloud9 they're not reliable anymore. Impulse over Enemy. This was a super crazy, chaotic game with a ton of kills, which is great for fantasy production. Awesome for me. In one of my leagues, I needed 12 points out of Rush to get me the win. Got me plenty more than that. So happy with that. Really happy that Impulse didn't go 0-2 this week, because they did get upset by Dig. So at least they were able to pull out the win there with plenty of points to spare. And then Dignitas finishing off the week against Team Liquid, going 2-0 against Impulse and Liquid, both top of the table teams, or at least top half of the table teams, and it's looking good for them. Team Dignitas. All right, so let's talk. So we'll look forward to Week 5. We'll stick with NA, and we'll stick with Team Dignitas. So Team Dignitas going into Week 5 has a very good matchup against Enemy and TDK. Very safe to say they're going to beat TDK. Enemy is definitely better, but I think that Dignitas can go 2-0 this week, and based off the way they played last week, beating teams like Impulse and Liquid, it's a really good chance, and they're going to be pretty good with fantasy production. Now, I hesitate, right, because you had teams like Rocket, who had a free week last week on paper and absolutely didn't do anything, right? It was super disastrous for a lot of people who put stock into Rocket for that week. And Dignitas is kind of similar in terms of it's a low-tier team with an easy matchup, and they could fall prey to the free week fallacy, right? So a little bit risky, but I think that Dignitas is worth playing in flex situations. Core JJ, Shifter, Gamsu. If you need a flex player, I think you can stick them in. It's worth taking the risk because, they just look really strong. And I would even say if you're desperate, you definitely pick up those players. And even if you're not desperate, maybe if you're just just not particularly confident in your flex or your mid laner for this week, I have some tough matchups. Slot in Shifter, slot in JJ, and I think you got yourself a good temporary sub. So go ahead with the Dignitas players. Team 8, sorry, not Team 8 yet. Impulse going up against Gravity and Cloud9. So Impulse, once again, is definitely, you could just feel that they're weaker. You could see that they're weaker than they were last split. That being said, they still have these random, crazy, chaotic games where they put up crazy amount of fantasy points, and there's no reason to think they won't be able to produce that same kind of thing against Gravity and Cloud9, especially now that Cloud9's a bottom-tier team, and there's no reason to think they'll lose to Cloud9, especially after beating them in the first round robin. So Team Impulse, go ahead and play those guys. Liquid going up against CLG and Gravity, excuse me. Gravity's tough. CLG is tough. I don't think they're gonna win against CLG. I'll be honest. I think CLG takes that W. And then Gravity, they had a tough time against Gravity. They lost in the first round robin to them. So this isn't that easy of a week for Team Liquid. But for some reason, it seems like a lot of their play is based around how they do in picks and bans. And if they have a good pick ban, the likelihood of them winning is like significantly increased, and if they have a bad one, it's significantly decreased. So you can go ahead and play your liquid players if you think that their win against, if their potential, which they could lose, win against Gravity will be enough to get them the points. But for me, it's a little bit risky. I'm definitely going to put in Impact instead of Quas this week, and I'm probably going to put in Froggen over Phoenix as well. I'm a little bit hesitant, and I definitely think that you know, CLG just put up crazy points. There's just no reason to think that CLG is going to lose to Liquid. TSM playing Teammate and CLG. So, as you guys know, Keith McBrief has been brought into the the TSM house. I guess as a form of motivation, as a attempt to light some fire under Wild Turtle's ass, because he's not producing well. His team's 6-2. He has a really low damage output from any AD carry across the NALCS, and it's just a decision that the TSM management wanted to make. I don't think it's a bad decision. I think it, like in conventional purposes, it should serve its purpose, because if I'm Wild Turtle and I see this going on, I got to read these Reddit comments. I got to read these, this hate. You'll get some supports. Plenty of people were like, "This is a bad move. Wild Turtle's great, right?" But worst case scenario, it should make Turtle better. It should make him be more serious, more motivated. So I think TSM naturally beats Teammate. And then versus CLG, they do obviously have a very good track record against CLG. They seem to be their kryptonite as of late. They'll have that going for them, history, as well as the fact that I think you'll have a kind of revamped, remotivated, refocused Wild Turtle. So I think TSM goes 2-0 this week, and I think they're able to put up plenty of points. So don't worry about, go and start your TSM players. And I'm going to give the green light on Dyrus. Dyrus is playing really well. I'm really impressed by the way that he's been able to step it up the split. So yeah, I'm giving my fantasy Dyrus blessing for this week, guys. Cloud9 going up against TDK and Team Impulse. I really hope they beat TDK. If they don't beat TDK, I don't know, man. It's rough. But against Impulse, they lost last time they were ahead, and then they lost in that one mid-game dragon fight that just lost them the game. So I don't know. It's really tough for Cloud9. If you're kind of desperate, maybe you throw in Sneaky or Incarnation, but that's really about it. Meteos, no. Lemon, no. And Balls, no. Sorry. And then Dignitas versus Enemy, and Enemy versus Dignitas and Team 8. Enemy is they're good and they put up points, but they're just a new team, so you don't know. This week, if it was week 1, I would say they would have gone 2-0, but now the way Dignitas is looking, I'm thinking they're probably going to lose to Dignitas, but they could probably beat Team 8. Now, I think that Enemy is a Inox and Otter. I think you could throw them into your flex this week for sure. But in terms of I wouldn't have him as your starting AD carry or your starting mid laner. Gravity up against Impulse and Liquid. So Gravity's doing really well. Players like Haunter, Keen, Altic, all producing at a really good rate. The problem is the next 2 weeks will be a real test for him, because this week they have Impulse and Liquid, like I said, and then next week they have TSM and CLG. So the next 2 weeks are going to be very difficult for him. So I personally would stay away from him. I wouldn't necessarily drop him, because I think they do have value. But, just leave them on your bench for this week, because I think it is a little bit too risky. CLG versus Liquid and TSM. So this is probably one of the harder weeks CLG will have. And really, the main problem I have with it is the historical relevance of these two teams. So CLG recently has gotten dusted by TSM, 0-3 in their last 3 encounters. And I think they're 0-5 against Liquid, went 0-2 against the round robin with them last split, and then got swept 3-0'd in the playoffs of last split. So definitely history is not on their side. But presently, they are doing tremendously. So the good news is with CLG is that even in that week where they played TSM and they lost, they still put up, I think every one of them put up more than 40 points that week. Even though they had the loss over TSM. So they definitely have proven to be a team where all they need is one win, and it justifies starting them. So I think you go ahead and play your top scoring Doublelift, your, I think, third scoring pole belter, your top scoring top laner in Zion. Go ahead and play those guys. And Afro as well with the top scoring support. Xmithy, a little bit different, but I'd still go ahead and play him. Maybe there's some better choices for him, but overall, you got to go ahead with the CLG, even though they do have a tough week. Team 8, like I said, is up against TSM and Enemy. Probably going to lose to TSM. They might have a chance against Enemy, but once again, they just, they need some more time to develop. There's no real reason to invest, so stay away from Team 8. Stay away from TDK. So that does it for NA. Switching over to EU for next week. I'll start out with Fnatic up against H2K and Gambit. Like I said, there's no reason to ever sit Fnatic. Fnatic actually has a good track record against H2K, so really minimal worry here. Sure, H2K could take the game off of Fnatic, but overall, I think that Fnatic will be fine. So go ahead with Fnatic. Go ahead with Origin up against Gambit and Copenhagen Wolves. Should be a pretty free week for Origin. As well as Unicorns of Love up against Roccat and Giants. So a good week for them. They did well last week. Even though they went 1-1, they still did well in fantasy point production. No real reason to think they won't this week. So those three teams are definite starters. And then Elements. Elements could be a good start this week. They're up against SK and Giants. Now, they did lose to Giants in the first round robin, and SK has looked better as of late, but Elements has also looked better as of late. So I have a little bit of confidence in them going into this week. If you need a flex spot, you could throw in Tabs, throw in Froggen. For me personally, I only have the choice between Froggen and Phoenix this week, pretty much. I wanted to go and pick up Shifter, but he unfortunately was taken before I was able to. So I think that Froggen and Tabs are good choices for this week. Not guarantees by any mean, but according to the matchups and according to their recent play, I think things do point in their favor. So outside of that, you have teams where I think Giants against Unicorns of Love and Elements, they're probably going to lose both these games, but if you're really desperate, maybe you throw in Peppy to your flex, but that's about it. Copenhagen Wolves, I'd still stay away from. They're against Origin, who I think they'll get dusted by, and Roccat, who this matchup could be a fantasy bloodbath. It totally can, but I just think that the environment is too weird and it's not reliable enough. So I would probably stay away from Copenhagen Wolves as well. And then Roccat going up against Unicorns of Love, and like I said, Copenhagen Wolves. Sure, they might have a good fantasy day against Copenhagen Wolves, but I don't think they're going to be good against Unicorns of Love, and I don't think it justifies starting them for the week. And then Gambit, definite no against Origin and Fnatic. Probably the second hardest week that you could have in the EU LCS. And even though they have been looking better, there's no real reason to think that they're going to beat either of these two teams. H2K, Fnatic versus going up against Fnatic and SK. Honestly, they're probably going to lose to Fnatic, but the way that they're playing, they're producing a ton of points, even in individual games. So I think their win over SK will give them enough points to justify starting them. So go ahead with your H2K players, and then SK playing Elements, and like I said, H2K. They're looking better recently. It was a really nice 2-0 week that they had in week 4, and they definitely can beat Elements. I don't think they're going to beat H2K, so I think you still got to stay away from them, but keep your eye open in an upcoming week where they have an easier matchup, where they have 2 easy matchups. I think you could be able to invest into some of them there. All right, so that does it for review/preview. So I talked about last week. I talked about or my last video. I talked about recognizing your draft mistakes, right? And so this time of the year, it's very, very useful to start checking out what you can do for trades, right? Because you basically have people's tendencies. You know how things are going to be in general, right? You know the average amount of points that someone will most likely put up. Obviously, things change because the matchups are different, but overall, you have a feel of how each team is going to be performing. So it's a good time where you need to plug in the holes that you have in your lineup, right? And so for me, when I break down my lineup, the lineup that I show you guys, right? So I have Quas and Impact at top lane, which is really, really solid. Between one of those two guys, one of them will have a good week. So I'm really happy with that. Don't need to change it. I have Amazing in my jungle spot. Also really, really happy with him. Basically a rock. No reason to get rid of him either. Then I have, as my bottom lane, I have Reckless as my starting AD, and then Yellowstar or Mithy, right? And those a really, really good combination of Yellowstar and Mithy. This week, I'm actually going to start Mithy because I think Origin has a little bit of an easier matchup because they don't have to face H2K like Fnatic does. But overall, no reason to change those guys, right? And then my team, I have H2K and Origin. Now, I don't actually have Origin. I have Origin this week. I had H2K this week. I dropped H2K just because I didn't want to drop Phoenix, who and so actually, I'll get to that in a second. So Origin and H2K, as I'm kind of alternating teams between them, but I don't have H2K on my bench quite yet. And then my problem area is my mid and my flex, right? So initially, my first draft, I got Froggen as my starting mid laner and Freeze for my flex. Now, Freeze not really doing that well. Had a great first week. Ever since then, hasn't been doing that great. Obviously, Copenhagen Wolves have had some trouble in general, so no reason to really keep him around. So I dropped him, and right now Phoenix is my backup, right? So I have Froggen and Phoenix are my two problem players. Players that don't always produce, especially Froggen. Phoenix has been good the last 2 weeks. I just really was upset because in week 2 he had he only put up 18 in a 1-1 week, and I was really disappointed in that. But overall, my mid lane and my flex are what need strengthening, right? So when you're making a trade, you got to see who you have that you can afford to lose. So for me, I have two really good top laners, Impact and Quas, and two really good supports in Mithy and Yellowstar. And if I want to, I can get H2K as my team. So I have H2K and Origin. So those are 3 chips that I can potentially use to trade for a good mid laner. So I went in and I checked out my other team's lineups, saw where my opponents' lineups, saw where their weaknesses was, and go ahead and made trade proposals. Right. So the first trade proposal I made was to this one guy who had Pobelter and Bjergsen as his mid laners, and I would love to have either one of them, right? But what was interesting was he has Doublelift and Nils as his AD carries, right? So essentially, he's been playing Nils and Doublelift as flex. He's been playing Nils as flex, Doublelift as AD carry, and Bjergsen as mid, right? And so he has Balls as his top laner. So what I said to him, I proposed and I said, hey man, looks like you could use a better top laner, which is true because Balls is not producing, and I need a better mid laner. So I will trade you Quas or Impact. You can choose either, right, for Pobelter. Okay, and that was my shtick, right? And the reason for it was because historically I looked at his roster and he hasn't played Pobelter. He hasn't played Pobelter at all, and he also is 3-1, right? So I figure that, hey, you know what? He doesn't need Pobelter because he has a great flex option between Niels and Doublelift on his team, and he's not using him anyway. And he's going to get a big upgrade if he upgrades to Impact or Quas from Balls, right? So that's the idea behind it, and the reason is so I still have a good top laner, whether Quas or Impact is left, and I gain a really, really great mid laner in exchange. So we both come out on top of that trade if it goes through. I'm actually not going to propose it for this week because I do think CLG might lose to TSM, but that'll be my proposal for next week, right? And then another case was another team who has Zhao Zhao and Ryu as his mid laners, but he also has a different flex player that he uses instead of Ryu. So he hasn't used Ryu at all in those last 3 weeks. And he needed a good support player. So I was like, hey, I'll trade you Mithy. I think Yellowstar is a little bit too valuable right now. I'll trade you Mithy, and I haven't made the trade, but I'm going to propose this. I'll trade you Mithy for Ryu, right? And so this one is a little bit riskier because even though H2K has been putting up a lot of points and been having a great year, Ryu hasn't been the biggest benefactor. It's actually been more of Yarnan, Odowanme, and Kasing that have been the fantasy producers there. But I just need someone that's consistent, and I can really rely on Ryu to be that consistent playmaker for me in the mid lane, someone that's much better and more consistent than Phoenix or Froggen, right? And on the other end, I still have Yellow Star, who's going to be great for me anyway. So those are just examples of trades that you can do. You want to be able to, you have to offer something good to the other guy. Obviously, if he's smart, you can't trade screw him over, right? Because, as long as they're paying attention, right? And so you just got to see how valuable it is. And for me, I need a mid laner. Mid lane is really, really important. And I'm happy. I'm 3-1 right now, but the reason why I'm not 4-0 is because I don't have a good mid laner. So very important to prioritize where your needs are. You go ahead and check out what their roster is, see what their mistakes are, what their holes are, where their gaps are. And if you have that opportunity, you can go in and basically offer a free fix to them instead of something that they would have to pick up off of the waiver wire. So that's my 2 cents on trades. So that'll do it for this week. Next week, I'll do some more. I'll do the ranking. Like I said, it was just this last week. I was just really, really busy. I just did not have enough time to make it in a presentable way to you guys. So that'll come next week. And so I hope you guys win this week. I hope you guys won last week. And if you have any questions on lineups or anything like that, throw it in the comment, and I'll get back to you. So all right, I'll catch you guys next time.